What is going on? Well, DeSantis and the Florida legislature passed a bill. Selfish narcissist with the just fame on your wall. Dumb. Barring teachers from speaking to kids from K to 3rd grade about talking about gender, sex, anything. Just none of that stuff. Not allowed to talk from K to 3rd grade about it. Been dubbed as the Do Not Say Gay bill. I think is ridiculous because I read the bill myself. It was 7 pages. It was a really light read. Do yourself a favor and read it. I'll try to link it below if I remember. Read it yourself, okay? What it does, and I think most parents would agree with this, okay? Most parents would agree with not speaking to our kindergarten to grade 3 students about sex in any way. That's straight sex, that's anything. The left has dubbed it the Do Not Say Gay bill because they are afraid that teachers aren't allowed to talk about their personal lives, or if a kid comes to school that has, 2 same-sex parents, they won't be able to talk about that. It's not true. Yeah, no LGBTQ topics at all. No trans topics. They're not allowed to talk about that. Not sex. That's straight included, everybody. So I've read it, and I get a little bit frustrated because so many people just hear that and they're like, oh, that's it. But if you haven't read it yourself, I defy you. Go read it and then come back with what you think it is.
The actual text of the bill states, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Republican lawmakers have said the bill would not prohibit student-led discussions that touch on sexual orientation and gender identity, such as a student including her same-sex parents on a family tree assignment, and only prohibits formal instruction on those issues. But opponents worry about the interpretation of the word instruction. What happens when a student asks for an explanation of why his classmate has same-sex parents? Does that fall under the meaning of instruction? In other words, what happens when questions arise that are not part of the teacher's lesson plan but that tie to sexual orientation or gender identity in some way? In the event of a legal challenge, any decent lawyer is going to look to the preamble to determine the scope of that word. And in the preamble, the bill's authors write that their aim is to prohibit classroom discussion. So which is it? The bill's sponsors did not answer repeated queries to clarify what was meant by instruction during House and Senate debates, and Republicans blocked several attempts to make the language more specific, like this one that sought to limit instruction to curriculum. So, no, it is not yet clear what this bill will mean for gay and trans students' ability to be themselves in the classroom. Because the law empowers parents to sue their child's school if they find some part of a lesson to be inappropriate, many teachers will just understandably avoid any topic that might put them and their school in that position. Opponents also worry about the use of this word, or. This word separates 2 groups to which this bill applies. The bill is an outright ban on instruction for the first group, kindergarten through grade 3. For all remaining grade levels, the bill limits the instruction to what is considered age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students, in accordance with state standards. A clause on the final page of the bill gives the Florida Department of Education some time to update their standards, to specify what exactly that means, and those will influence how this bill is implemented. In other words, yes, this bill could apply to children older than grade 3. One final note about those state standards.
The state standards for the state of Florida, the state education standards, are set by a body of people who are appointed by the governor. They are not elected by the people, they are not representative of the people, and they are not beholden to the people. So if this law passes, these unelected people are going to be allowed to set the standards for instruction on sexual orientation and gender identification for every single grade in the Florida public education system.
Republicans have framed this as a limitation on sexual education. But if that were the intent, they wouldn't have blocked multiple attempts to make this a bill banning discussion of sexual topics for young children. Instead, it bans instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity. The vagueness of that definition leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Does it include teaching materials like books with an LGBTQ protagonist or historical figures? What about this example taken directly from the kindergarten social studies standards for the state of Florida? Compare children and families of today with those in the past. One thing a teacher might want to talk about, or that a student might themselves point out, is that there are a lot more LGBTQ families, at least openly, today. This bill would put that teacher at risk of being sued if a parent is unhappy about their child hearing about families different from their own. Because society defaults to straight and cis people, this bill won't be used to ban conversations about these families. But it will be used to ban conversations about these ones. It's asking our LGBTQ children to grow up in an environment without any representation, where any mention of them is seen as taboo or inappropriate. That's why it's being called the Don't Say Gay bill. It doesn't just ban instruction on sex in the classroom. It erases LGBTQ kids and their families. So Josh is wrong when he says the bill doesn't single out the LGBTQ community because it bans discussion of all sex, straight and gay, and of all gender identities. That may be what the bill literally says, but it is not what it will mean in practice. Consider what applying the law across the board to all sexual orientations and gender identities would actually look like.
Ooh, y'all, this Florida teacher just read the Don't Say Gay bill for filth in an email that she sent out. Y'all gotta hear this. Dear Florida parent/caretaker, the Florida House of Representatives has recently ruled that classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students. To be in accordance with this policy, I will no longer be referring to your student with gendered pronouns. All students will be referred to as they or them. I will no longer use a gender title such as Mr. or Miss or make any references to my husband/wife in the classroom. From now on, I will be using the non-gendered title MX. Furthermore, I will be removing all books or instruction which refer to a person being a mother, father, husband, or wife, as these are gender identities that may also allude to sexual orientation. Needless to say, all books which refer to a character as he or she will also be removed from the classroom. If you have any concerns about this policy, please feel free to contact your local congressperson.
But I think we all know that this isn't how the law will be implemented. So, if Josh did indeed read this bill, he certainly didn't understand its implications. So, what is this bill really about? I will let the bill's original sponsor, Dennis Baxley, explain in his own words.
This bill prohibits the school district from encouraging classroom discussion and agenda about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels.
Why do you have a specific subsection relating to sexual orientation? Why have that at all? Why not just talk about parents' role?
Because it's the topic nobody will directly deal with, and yet there's a reorientation going on in our culture. And I think when you start opening sexual type discussions with children, you're entering a very dangerous zone. But I don't think teachers' role is to have discussions about sexuality with their own sexuality with these students. I think that's stepping out there too far. That we have an agenda that is part of the curriculum that is, I believe, social engineering, and it's age inappropriate.
Question: if a teacher asks a student in a class to talk about their families, and their teacher knows that one student has a gay or lesbian parent, so if a question is asked, does that mean that the teacher should not respond to that child based on the law that we're about to pass?
You might ought to say, ask your mother.
Why is everybody now all about coming out when you're at school? And there really is a dynamic of concern of how much of this are genuine type of experiences and how many of them are just kids trying on different kinds of things they hear about and different kinds of identities and experimenting. That's what kids do, you know. Maybe they're in this club or they're in that club or they're on to this. And they're trying on all these different identities of life, trying to see where they fit in. And it is simply, are we encouraging this or illuminating it by putting emphasis on it, or are we helping something? And I think 75% of people that I see, polled on this bill they agree with me that there's something wrong with how we're emphasizing this, and that all of a sudden, overnight, they're a celebrity.
House Bill 1557 is part of a nationwide push by Republican legislatures passing bills that target LGBTQ youth. This tactic of posing gay and trans people as predators and a danger to children has been around for at least the last 60 years.
The myth that LGBTQ teachers want to groom kids or turn them gay is just another piece of garbage from the 1970s. Bryant was a hateful bigot who lobbied for the repeal of a Miami ordinance barring anti-gay discrimination. Bryant argued it would allow homosexuals to provide role models for the impressionable and enable homosexuals to recruit youths.
This proposition is a referendum statewide on the rights of parents. What it does do is give school boards new authority to remove from the classroom a teacher who is pushing homosexuality.
Joseph Stern writes in Slate, this outlandish and bigoted notion has deep roots. You see this assumption in the infamous 1961 short film Boys Beware, which warned school children against predatory homosexuals and was produced in part by, of course, a school district. You see it in the failed 1978 campaign to ban gay teachers from California schools. You see it in Board of Education versus National Gay Task Force, a 1985 case in which the Supreme Court struck down an Oklahoma law barring teachers from encouraging or promoting homosexuality. The state cited a need to protect student morality and traditional cultural values, worrying about student imitation of gay teachers. You see it in many ads supporting Proposition 8, which asserted that legal same-sex marriage would force educators to indoctrinate kids. Tagline, it has everything to do with schools.
Today, we will sign HB1557, the Parents' Rights in Education Bill. We will make sure that parents can send their kids to school to get an education, not an indoctrination.
The spokesperson for Ron DeSantis even went as far as to call this an anti-grooming bill, posting the following on her personal Twitter page. If you are against the anti-grooming bill, you are probably a groomer, or at least you don't denounce the grooming of 4 to 8-year-old children. Silence is complicity. If you're noticing a similarity to arguments Josh regularly makes on his channel, it isn't coincidence. Because Josh largely agrees with this point of view.
The argument on the right is that this conversation, this type of rhetoric, this type of curriculum is grooming children. The left will say, that's not going on anyway, and then the right will say, then why do you care? We all know that this stuff is pervasive in our school systems in Canada and the US. Hundreds of teachers talking about how they speak to their children about this, some in daycares. Now, as a kid who grew up in the 80s and 90s, it just wasn't a thing when I was a kid. Okay, I think we're seeing something happen here, and I do think that it comes down to education. And if you go to if you look at some teachers and this Florida bill that's going through, I do feel like this is being pushed on kids way more than it ever was. I think the numbers are, I think 40% of adolescents right now then have a different gender identity than the one they're born with. That is a huge number. A lot of that has to come down to education too. A lot of it has to come down to acceptance. A lot of it has to come down to the culture we live in and what they're teaching them at school.
It saddens me to have to even point this out, but being gay or trans isn't contagious. It isn't a mental illness. It isn't something a person can be coerced, groomed, or tricked into becoming. It is simply who they are. And to suggest anything else is incredibly bigoted.
The hypersexualizing of LGBTQ people and reducing us to a perversion is at the core of homophobia and transphobia. It always has been. This idea that LGBTQ people are nothing but their sexual orientation or gender identity is at the core of the thing people use to justify violence and discrimination against LGBTQ people. So this idea that we can't discuss LGBTQ people because then we are by its nature discussing sex is actually rooted in bigotry, and we've got to break our minds outside of that. LGBTQ people are not just LGBTQ, but it is a part of who we are, and that deserves to be celebrated and identified.
You'll often hear Josh claim to be middle of the road on controversial issues. He does it here as well. This is how he describes Abigail Schreier's book, which he continues to push on his channel.
Where I stand on this issue overall, and after reading books like Abigail Schreier's book and and reading other articles for and against trans issues, where I've landed is like I usually do in most things, is right in the middle. Okay? So if my kid were to come tell me that they were trans, I would be supportive of my child. I would use their preferred pronouns at that time. I am in the camp with, and this is going to be very, very, this is like, it's almost dangerous for me to say this. I am in the wait and see camp. Okay, the wait and see camp. If you haven't read Abigail Schreier's book here, I suggest you go read it. There have been creators that were aligned with me until I said I read this book, and they were no longer aligned with me. And I asked them to read the book. I said, "Will you tell me? I want you to read the book, and I want you to tell me what's transphobic about this." Because everybody, if you are not 120,000% with the trans movement, you are a transphobe, and you are labeled such. You are a Nazi. Everything else. You're the worst person in the world.
Schreier's central argument is that the sudden surge in the number of teen girls identifying as trans is due not to transgenderism, but rather to girls with other mental conditions who are mistakenly self-identifying as trans, because there is social capital built into marginalized identities. The author recruits the language of pathology and pedophilia, which can be seen just in the book and chapter titles alone. The stories she shares are those of parents of trans kids, and it is unclear whether her most vulnerable subjects, the children they are speaking about, were ever given permission to opt out. The book has been denounced by GLAAD, who call it transphobic and harmful to trans kids. It is far from middle of the road. And while I appreciate Josh's decision to respect gender pronouns, he reveals his true feelings when he calls them a lie in the same breath.
In one point, I'm like, hey, you're a consenting adult. You do what you want. You want me to call you Z and they and them and all that stuff? You know what? If it makes you happy, it doesn't hurt me. You hear this phrase a lot. I don't want to fall into your, these are lies. So I don't want to have to repeat these. I don't want to be forced to repeat these lies, quote unquote. But I'm at the point where I'm like, when it comes to this type of issue, it makes you happy. I'm whatever. Who am I?
Let's talk about why this matters. Listen to Josh's arguments about the Jolie family and their transgender child.
Like it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't affect me. So at the same time, and I think there is a portion of being a human and decent to other humans that if these people are absolutely going through these issues, I mean, it doesn't hurt me. So of course, but where it starts to bug me is when kids are pushed and coerced into this. Yeah. No, you imagine a future for Eduardo, and it's going exactly how you thought, exactly how you wanted it to. Again, we can't ask the question. We have to be able to be there. That a parent who struggles with the same identity issues is likely going to project that. That's the word I'm looking for. Project that onto a child. Absolutely. There's some projection going on. I just don't think that this one is genuine. I think Jonathan was a big part of Eduardo's transformation because Jonathan lived in the closet, so to speak, his entire life about his identity. His wife didn't even know about it. He kept it quiet from everybody. And so if a parent's going through that and they got a child going through that, then that's a huge bonding thing. Yeah. I think it was 2 years ago. I think it was always there. Yeah, you're right. It was there. No. Again, this is why I think this is a coercion thing. I honestly believe, again, when you go back to the wait and watch, I think it's called wait and watch theory, is that you just wait and watch. You don't pressure your kids to do those things, right? You just let it be as it is without coercing them more towards it. And I think that Jonathan pushed Eduardo way towards that because he was struggling with his own identity issues until he came out a year ago?
To start, I realize a lot of people take issue with the kind of content this family posts of their children online. But Josh isn't just arguing that these parents exploit every moment of their kids' lives, which would, by default, include their trans daughter's journey. He isn't even just arguing that they coerced her into being trans for clicks and views. He is arguing that Jonathan coerced his daughter into being trans because he is himself non-binary. I'm not sure why more people don't see how transphobic that argument is.
Eduardo's 8? How do you talk to your kid about this? This is the issue that I'm having. How does a kid know? It's got to be the education system, right? It's teachers who are saying, yeah, I'm this now. You see it.
Growing up, I knew that a lot of my teachers were married to opposite sex partners. No one accused them of grooming me into being straight. Josh likes to say that people come to his channel for the snark and stay for the message.
Yes, I can be petty. Yes, I can be funny. Yes, I can be a douchebag. And you can call me a bully all you want. But the reason I do it is because that brings people to this channel. And then when I get people to this channel, I can do videos like this that help you understand why we shouldn't be allowing this.
To extend that a bit further, I am concerned that people come for the snark, stay for the message, and end up absorbing some of these very problematic points of view. And these things have real-world impact. House Bill 1557, or the Don't Say Gay Bill, makes school unsafe for LGBTQ kids. This is a group that, according to the Trevor Project, is at least 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, not because their gender identity or sexual orientation make them more predisposed to it, but because of the stigma and mistreatment. And despite claims that this bill would protect children from grooming, it may actually put them at greater risk of it. I'm going to end this video with a clip from a creator named Rebecca Watson, because she explains it better than I ever could. But before I do that, I just want to ask those who still support Josh to hold him more accountable for the things he says and does on his channel. You can support him and also ask him to use his platform more responsibly.
Predators look for easy prey. And when it comes to a pedophile hoping to abuse a child, the easiest prey is often a child who is ashamed of their own body, ashamed of their own sexuality, ashamed of any discussion of sex. Experts agree that one of the best ways to protect a child from being groomed is open and honest communication with them. Here's a fact sheet from Michigan State University that points out one way to protect your child is to teach them early and often about consent and respect in relationships. An educated child is a safe child, and a child who isn't afraid to speak up to a trusted adult like a parent or a teacher is a safer child. So what happens when we raise kids to think of homosexuality or transgenderism as naughty topics that are off limits in school? Well, the same thing that happens when we decide that they shouldn't learn about their own bodies or about sex. When a predator abuses them, they take on the shame and they believe the groomer when they tell them that they need to keep a secret. What happens when we muzzle teachers and threaten them with lawsuits if they so much as answer kids' questions about relationships or gender or sexuality? Then those kids lose the ability to bond with an adult outside the home who they know they can go to for help if they need it. For instance, if they're being abused at home. They don't actually care about kids. The real purpose is to shame and criminalize gay and trans people. I'll end this the same way I end all of these types of videos. This bill has inspired copycat bills across the country in at least 10 states. We've got Alabama, Arizona, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, Louisiana, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas. They're all rushing to catch up to Florida. If I said the name of a state you live in, find out who your representative is in the state legislature and write or call them and tell them how you feel. If I didn't say the name of the state you live in, look up your representative anyway and make sure that they're not even considering this, because I guarantee there are going to be more bills in more states.